Okay, so we are recording now.
All right, everybody. This is Devin with the Christ Light and Love Center here in the middle of the Burkesville, Kentucky vortex. And this afternoon, I'm honored to have special guest Panyabasa. And Panyabasa has come on here today, and he's going to talk with us a little bit about the Buddhist take on the spiritual side or spirits, as the Gnostic Christians used to like to call them, the group called the Archons. But Panyo, why don't you go ahead and take it away, if you would? Tell my audience a little bit about your background, if you would.
All right, well, I was born at a very early age, like most people are, and grew up in the Pacific Northwest and got a degree in marine biology. And I still look at human beings, especially, as a kind of species of animal sometimes. It's really helpful to me in understanding human nature when you consider that we're like a kind of animal too, like an upgraded ape in a sense, biologically anyway. Obviously, the human mind has moved on to another dimension beyond other animals in a sense, but still, I mean, we have like animal bodies and we've got certain animal instincts that really it helps to understand why people behave the way they do. So, anyways, that was sort of my start. I had a weird father who was a hypnotist, considered himself to be a Buddhist, although his Buddhism was pretty sketchy because he learned most of his Buddhism from a dead Vietnamese monk who was channeled through a woman in a trance who was supposedly his guardian spirit, and they knew each other in a previous life.
Not to
And
interrupt, but that sounds like an episode all itself. I'd almost like to dig into that.
yeah,
But
just the weirdness of my father, because he really was he had this passion for unexplored frontiers, like geographically and also psychologically. I mean, he was like seeking out all the dark corners of the human mind and just seeing what was there and what are the limits of the human mind, what can we do. He's like practicing with ESP and dream communications and this kind of stuff. So I learned to be open-minded from him, which helped me to sort of like around the age of 16, I just kind of rebelled and rejected the whole Western normie attitude of, just swim upstream, spawn and die, just, whoever dies with the most toys wins. You just get, you get the job and you get married and you get the house and the mortgage and the bills and the kids and, the cars and that's just your life until you die. And it didn't make much sense to me. And I read ancient books and I was interested in different points of view. So then I start reading like ancient Indian books saying that you can know ultimate reality if you just, do these practices. And I figured, well, I mean, if it's possible to do that, then it's like my sacred duty to at least give it a shot. So around the age of 17, I got this aspiration of renouncing the world and becoming like some kind of monk or ascetic or something. Finally settled on Theravada Buddhism because it seemed to come the closest to what the historical Gautama Buddha actually taught. And so at the age of 27, I became a monk and remained a monk for 30 years. Most of that time was spent in Burma, and most of my time in Burma was spent living in caves and forests. So I pretty much avoided the orthodox stuff. I didn't become a monk in order to just be like Burmese monks. I just became a monk in order to follow what the texts say and understand reality as well as I can. And the texts say you should go off into the forest, go alone like the horn of the rhinoceros. And so that's what I did. And I continued doing that until I just got as far as I could with it. I just kind of started stagnating for several years at the end, just not being able to make any more progress. So I figured,
can, can, can you elaborate maybe a little bit on like what the stagnant, like what does that mean to you?
Well, like my meditation wasn't getting any better. In fact, the best meditation of my life occurred between the years 2000 and 2004. And then after that, I just never got into like these deep contemplative states, except for maybe a flash here and there.
I mean, like the mind blows where you feel like you're jumping dimensions or something?
Well, it's just like where you're just sitting there, your mind is just wide awake and silent. That kind of state. And I mean, that's what you're supposed to be accomplishing. Even like the Catholic and Greek Orthodox mystics, in the contemplative traditions, they're essentially cultivating the same state. They call it high contemplation. In Buddhism, it's called jhana, or just, good meditation. And anyways, I just started kind of stagnating. I got as far as I could with it. So I figure, I mean, if you're not making improvement for several years at a stretch, then it's time to try something different. So I came back to America and became a guy with a job and a shirt and shoes and everything, and here I am.
So now, obviously, you're still, you haven't given up practice, right? You've just sort of figured out how to do it with the job, and you have a girlfriend now, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, so it's sort of like being a layperson is like the more advanced difficulty setting of the game. It's like being a monk, a renunciant. Everything is simple. Everything is slowed down and simplified, so it's easier to cultivate these states. But sometimes, I mean, there's other things you have to deal with, just all this karma stuff that, I mean, you have to learn how to deal with that, like skillfully also. So I've kind of changed gears and have gone more in that direction of like applying what I've learned as a monk to trying to live more wisely, as a regular person with a job and, friends and bills to pay and all that.
So as some of our Christian listeners might recognize my term, the fallen world, has some of your skills that you learned as a Buddhist monk help you in this come back to this fallen world?
Yeah, in a way it really has, especially being an ascetic, where you like an ascetic is someone who is just learns to be okay with being uncomfortable. That's one of the main purposes of Buddhist asceticism is if you can be happy when your stomach is empty and you're dripping in sweat and you're all alone and you've got no money and no friends and you're sleeping on a concrete floor. If you can be happy in a situation like that, you can be happy just about, under any circumstances.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it has been very helpful to me. Just being a Buddhist ascetic, practicing, equanimity and patience and so forth. Sometimes it's really a trial, because you're dealing with situations that monks don't deal with, like, a woman who's very good at pushing buttons or something,
Yeah.
then yeah, I mean, it's really like a more advanced level practice. So it's easier just to get lost because, most people are essentially lost. They don't really, they think that this is reality. The material world is the only reality and they're just stuck in it.
Yeah. No, it that makes a lot of sense. And, I kind of came out to the center, out in BFE. It's, we were 40 acres. It's now 30 acres. But, I thought, a lot of it was, to get back to the center and to find my center. But, when you've got 30 acres that's been neglected for quite some time, it's a lot of work. And so I'm learning probably one of the biggest things I need to learn and pick up my skill set in is what you just mentioned is patience. You know, I was yesterday when we happened to, mutually sort of miss our last call. Um, I was in the thickets, literally in the thickets of it with, kind of a handheld bushwhacker, just, almost cussing these thorns that I've got to seem to endlessly cut down on this property. So,
Yeah. Chop wood, carry water.
yeah. But like you said, I think just a second ago, it's part of my karma. It's part of my lessons here. It's part of the, hey, entering these higher states of consciousness that are not necessarily always that easy. And it's what I'm finding myself, just almost like what you've mentioned, is that I'm seeking myself, and maybe not a completely new practice necessarily, but other skills or maybe different tools that I can use to get back to that same place where I've been consciously before. I simply, I didn't know that there was a name for it prior to looking into what the Hindus were calling it and what the Buddhists were calling it. People are asking me, well, you say you're going to the state of consciousness, Devin, and I'm just like, I don't know. I just was calling it agape. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it's, you're in this state of being, it's pure love, joy, and bliss. And, You literally have that unconditional love that, the creator would have, for yourself and everybody around. You're connected to everything. And on a weird level, you become, although I've always been psychic to some degree, since I was a child, but you reach those states of higher consciousness, is my humble opinion. Like you pick up on everybody's thoughts.
Yeah,
Everybody's emotions, their intentions, good or bad. And that's the interesting part too that I found is, like, even if you know that somebody's having very, very negative ill thoughts to you, you can't let it affect you. Because if you do, then you might possibly fall out of that state of just love, pure love, joy, and bliss. So I find it's one thing to, like myself, almost accidentally kind of stumble upon it, but then to stay in it is a completely different. That's another story.
yeah, it's essentially mysticism. Regardless of the religion, I mean, there's the underlying mysticism in that there's like an underlying higher reality than this material world. I mean, it just, we're saturated in it, like fish in water. We're soaking in it all the time. I mean, how far away can you be from reality or the highest truth? It's always right here. It's just that most people are just completely distracted with their thoughts and their cultural conditioning and everything, and they're not even looking in the right direction, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you want to go ahead and dive into, because before we started recording, you started to kind of talk about, I think, more the orthodox view of where Buddhists kind of look at the spiritual side, and then you started off kind of maybe even giving a slight comparison of some of the Hindu texts that you've dug into on this topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole purpose of the talk, supposedly, I mean, like originally, I mean, it might deviate or change or whatever as it just progresses, but you have seen many different kinds of beings that are not really of this material world.
Yeah.
And I've got a friend named Stevens. I think you've watched at least one of our videos, who has had very similar experiences, seeing grays, seeing reptilians, seeing all sorts of things. And
he was listening to a couple of his things. He was almost, he's a bit like a kindred spirit, I think. And I still want to reach out to him. But, for whatever reason, spirit is the one, you are the one I'm supposed to speak to on this topic. That's just what I'm 99.9% sure of.
Yeah. And also, you may know that I've got a friend named Brian who is very interested in this kind of stuff.
Brian,
although his interpretation is more sort of materialistic, where, he believes that most of these creatures are beings from a different planet that have flown to Earth in spaceships and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Stevens and I are more inclined to think that, they're sort of in our midst all the time. It's just they're on a different wavelength, and most people just can't tune into that wavelength. Other people, they're not as finely tuned onto one wavelength. They've got sort of a looser or a broader range of wavelengths that they can access, and so they can see these things. Like small children can see spirits until they're taught that you can't really see them, not real, or they're taught
that down, Johnny. You can't see
don't
that.
want to see them. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So some like pre-modern kind of cultures, like, out in the villages of Burma, seeing ghosts and having witches and like strange creatures is fairly common. But I think it's because of like modern technology, where you have to be finely tuned into one wavelength of like a material world so that everything will, like the technology and everything will work correctly. It's like people have been culturally conditioned to have this very narrow like wavelength or bandwidth that they're able to perceive, so that most people are just blind to all this stuff that's going on all around them. And I mean, all of us are blind to all sorts of things that are all around us all the time, just because of the limitations of being a human.
Yeah.
So from the Buddhist point of view, for example, there's spirits all around us all the time, except they're like at a different frequency or it's called a different subtlety of matter. Like the ghosts, like the ghost realm that is considered to be, below the human level from the Orthodox Buddhist point of view. we can't see them, and for the most part, they can't see us either, unless there's certain circumstances or a person with a certain talent or a certain peculiarity in their mind can see them. On the other hand, like there are like small g gods, like what the Gnostics would call archons or whatever. They're just higher than us on the scale. They're more powerful, smarter, live longer, don't have diseases and so forth. They have more psychic power than we do. And they can see us, but we can't see them unless they want us to see them. They can like adjust their vibration or something so that they become visible to humans. So
Yeah,
I mean, that
yeah,
sort of
I've
thing
heard
is,
people say, they can lower their vibration down to where enough to where we can see them, or the average Joe maybe can see them. But yeah,
yeah. So that's like the Orthodox Buddhist point of view, like based on ancient Indian culture, ancient North Indian culture around 500 BC. That's what people, that's what the Buddhists anyway were saying with regard to other beings other than human and other than animals that are just living among us all the time. Although a lot of it is just, what people in general were believing in ancient India in like 500 BC or 400 BC. And I don't necessarily believe everything that I read in a book. And the Buddhist cosmology really doesn't have a way of accounting for something like grays or reptilians, something like that. I mean, like my friend Brian, he wants to think that the reptilians are what the Buddhists call nagas. Although that's kind of questionable because
well, I'm on the fence on that one.
yeah,
But
the nagas, according to ancient Indian mythology or folklore or just the common belief of the people, they were essentially cobras. They were like cobra dragons. So they were a cobra and they could breathe fire. They had human intelligence. They could shapeshift and look human if they wanted to. And personally, I think that is based largely on just like prehistoric cobra worshiping cults. Because I mean, a cobra, especially like a king cobra, it can be almost 20 feet long. And then when it like stands up, it can be taller than a man. And it's damn impressive. And if it bites you, you die. And so, since ancient times, there have been like cobra worshiping cults where people are essentially deifying cobras and attributing psychic powers to them and so forth as a kind
I,
of
I, I got I got to share this one. Not only ancient Hindu cults, but I got the only church I didn't go to, Christian denomination, was I got invited to one of these churches where they handle poisonous snakes.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
didn't go to that one. Yeah. So no,
yeah.
I
I've
think
read
in some way, shapes, and forms that may still carry over even to some of that Christian practice.
Yeah, well, that's all from that one Bible verse that says you'll know a true Christian because they'll handle poisonous snakes and they won't
Yeah, I don't know where the hell they get
drink
that.
poison and it won't kill them, that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
They take that very literally.
you can keep that one.
Yeah. So I have to have my own. I've got my own personal interpretation of certain things. I don't always necessarily follow along with the Orthodox tradition in Theravada Buddhism. So it's like in my Q&As, I do Q&A videos. People will be asking me questions about Buddhist philosophy and so forth. And a lot of times I have to give two different answers. It's like, well, the Orthodox position is this, but
Yeah.
personally, I don't quite buy it, and I'm inclined to believe this, you know.
Yeah, and I prefer that, brother, because you can talk to scholars, out the wazoo, and if all they can repeat is what they've read, well, they're just repeating somebody else's taker version of what could or could not be reality. That's where I like to have the person who's not afraid to step out and maybe try to break down into their own experience. Well, this is what it says, but like, I've had experience outside of that, or this is my own belief just because of other things, you've got some rubber meets the road. So, if nothing else, I feel like your opinion on it, right? And to me, they're really just all people's opinions. It's hard, I think, to say you've got the absolute truth on any of this. But yeah, your opinion to me, and I think my audience, is highly valuable.
Yeah. Well, one just fundamental teaching of Buddhism is karma, and karma is a mental state. karma is psychological. It's not like some kind of law of physics out there where, you know, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, you know, like cosmic justice kind of a thing. It's your own mind is got this momentum, like a perceptual momentum. And so you're putting yourself right where you need to be. And in a way, we're almost like in the Matrix or a kind of dream world. This is not ultimate reality according to Buddhism. You know, this room I'm sitting in, even this body I'm wearing, from the Buddhist point of view, is not ultimately real. It's just sort of like relatively real. But there's a higher truth that's higher than this that renders this just kind of irrelevant. You know, it's just kind of like a dream body in a dream room and so forth. And so
I don't consider it's not a computer simulation, but the way that we perceive it is not correct. Everything is always currently vibrating and moving. And rather than thinking us the way that I've seen us, rather than thinking of us as flesh and bone, I think we'd be better described as like energetic plasma, like always, almost like constantly moving. At least what I've seen. But sorry,
yeah. But it's largely our beliefs that add structure to it and keep it stable.
Yeah.
And different people have different beliefs, and if you have a whole different set of beliefs from somebody else, you're going to be living in a whole different world from somebody else, even though at the surface level you can kind of interact with each other. But still, I mean, we're all creating our own reality in a sense. And some people are creating a reality where they have access to other powers and other beings and so forth, which, you know, the normie who is just living just in an ordinary world, just believing everything he sees on the news and just believing what everybody around him believes, that he's not going to have access to this. Mainly just because he doesn't believe he has access. You know, it's just you believe you can't do something that makes it more likely that you can't do something.
Well, there was put to me at one point in time that, and I don't know how true this is. I'm sure you've heard this, but the first, say, Nina, the first ship that would have come across, right, over the ocean, probably not really Columbus, but that the natives would have seen, and even the elders from, the tale goes is that very few of them could actually see the ship. And you think, well, what the hell you mean? It's, you're sitting out there looking at this ocean all day and this thing, wooden that's got these, these fabric sails. You mean you couldn't see it? Well, maybe possibly if you simply don't have a reference point.
Yeah, I've heard that story. And then it was like the shamans who could see it because they were used to cultivating altered states of consciousness. They were more open-minded, so the shamans could see it first, and then they'd gradually get the other people to start seeing it too by kind of describing it to them and that kind of thing. Whether it really happened or not, I don't know, but that's
exactly. Yeah, well, there's something to say. Some people will say, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, it may be the opposite. You may actually have to kind of understand that it's a possibility and that it could be there for it to even register.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way science works too. It's like, I think it was Einstein says it is the theory which determines what you can observe. And so they've got like these particle accelerators and bubble chambers where they're looking at subatomic particles. And, for decades, they just don't see a certain subatomic particle until some scientist comes up with this theory that subatomic particle ought to exist according to this math here. And then once they kind of get into everybody's idea that this kind of subatomic particle should exist, all of a sudden people are seeing that new subatomic particle in like the bubble chambers and all that.
And that drags me into another thing I'm not even going to go down because I could talk a day on this, but is that reality, although I do believe we have a singular, but I believe it's part of a larger collective consciousness that we're creating around us, is my humble opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we're all kind of sharing, we all have some kind of telepathic connection, even though it might be at a subconscious level that most people don't have access to. Yeah. So if you're getting ripped off, deep down, you're getting ripped off. Or if you're being lied to, deep down, at a subconscious level at least, you're being lied to, but it's your karma to get ripped off or lied to in this position because you've got some kind of crooked karma that has to be addressed. And so you just kind of, at the superficial levels, you just go along with it and just, it happens. But with regard to like grays and reptilians and so forth, I mean, that seems to be of interest to you, that you do videos about seeing reptilians and grays and so forth.
What can I say? Well, I'll be honest. Like I had kept that card in my back pocket for a while because some people are either going to go, oh, that's pretty cool, or they're just going to go, oh, that's insane, that's impossible. You've watched way too many movies, smoked way too much dope, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm not trying to say I completely understand, even what I've seen, but I know I've seen it. And then I've come to find out, some people have suggested some books to me, and come to find out, well, obviously I'm not the first person, I won't be the last person, but other people, right? That's one thing I love about how I've experienced things, is that, I'll have to go out and learn it the hard way almost on my own, and then go later read about it to go, oh, okay. But if somebody would have told me, oh yeah, you can see these beings, and there's a way you can, I probably would have never seen one. But no one ever told me, so it just sort of happened. But the other thing is, it's obviously become a real popular subject, and it's almost become mainstream. Before it, where it was just kind of in the real deep recesses of weird places on the internet. But I mean, now there's videos come out where you've got politicians with their eyes shifting. You've got that member of parliament, and she looks like she became like a reptilian queen. And I'll be honest with everybody out there, a lot of that stuff I've seen on the internet, I do believe is doctored, but I've seen folks' eyes shift to reptilian. So I know 110% that's real. I've seen people where they actually have a reptile, what I call, in their field. But, see, this is where I'm a little bit lost. I'll be honest with you here. And maybe as we discuss, you can say, well, maybe that's this reference, Devin, or here we look at this right place in history or text. And so, no, brother, I've seen when it was almost like they live. And this woman one night, she didn't have a layover. Her eyes didn't change. But I mean, if I would have reached out and poked her, I know her head would have been scaly. I mean, the human head was gone. And it was a reptilian head. Now, I know who I was sitting there talking to and getting romantic with. I know who it was. Maybe I should have been involved with the woman. Maybe I, should have taken a little bit more time to get to know her. But, I mean, as soon as that happened, got right up and walked out.
Man. Yeah, I think David Icke is the one who pretty much brought that kind of thing into the mainstream.
Well, once I saw that, and then heard him a couple months ago talk about, he is saying that, there is a hybrid line to where they carry both DNA, and so that once in a while you'll actually see the other side of it. I mean, I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't know. But I'm saying that, no, there's something going on to where if I see it in the eyes, if I see it in a person's field, or when they just full blown, their human head disappears and it's a scaly reptile, I'm not telling anybody I know exactly what it means, but I'm saying that I've experienced it. But so, this might lead us into, the Nagas. Because I think that's the closest that I've seen. And again, I'm no expert. But, you've still got Hindus that'll have temples to the Nagas, right? So they're worshiping these beings. I would have to imagine that if they were just totally benevolent beings, that, temples wouldn't have been erected to them. But then again, I know people that, have in this day and age have made deals with demons and genies and all kinds of things. So, I don't know. Maybe it's something where, you go into these temples and, you give a couple coins and you make a deal with these beings. Why don't you open up there? I'll quit rambling.
Yeah, well, with regard to like Indian Naga worship, again, what I consider to be most likely, at least with regard to most of it, is that it started off as cobra worship. And then, you just attribute these powers to this awesome creature, like in the Buddhist texts, like I already said, they've got human intelligence, they can shapeshift, they can look just like a human if they want to, but when they're unconscious, they have to revert to their natural form, which is like a huge snake. So, I mean, it doesn't exactly fit the descriptions of reptilians. There's some overlap, and there might be some kind of relation between the two.
Well,
But
I've seen beings that look more like a serpent rather than a reptile, and would say that, from their MO and from the people who they were around, I would say no, it's not a benevolent being, it's a nasty thing.
yeah,
But I kind of like the way I can detect them and see them. The serpent's a whole lot harder to see, but they kind of have their own MO, I call it. So kind of when I can see it in the energetic field and in the eyes, but it's different to me. Like it's just a different energy. Now, neither one of them I want to be around, but it's at this point in time that I do believe there's actually maybe two different set of beings. There's another nurse. She did an interview recently with Jerry Lazinski, and I've got an interview coming up with him. But she's kind of like me. She, is a bit of a seer. I think probably even a little bit more advanced than me, but grew up or was working as a nurse in a psych ward. And we'll talk about reptilian and then what looks like serpent beings. So I think she may have seen, something that at least in her mind appears a little different. But I'll be honest, like they have similarities at least, but one would definitely look more snake-like and one would look more lizard-like, I guess. The best I can
yeah,
describe it.
yeah. Well, Brian Rue in his group, who really take this seriously. They've got it almost like into the form of a religion. They've got just this hierarchy, this classification of all these beings. You've got reptilians, which come from another world. You've got repterans, who are like a kind of reptilian that have lived on this earth for thousands of years,
You
and
think
they're
that might be the Nagas?
yeah, maybe. And they're in some kind of league with like the US government or something. And then you've got like the Greys, who are the servants of the Mantids, and the Greys are like interacting with other human groups on this planet, and they've got some greater plan for the spiritual development of the human race to bring us up to a high enough level that we'll be worthy to join this confederation of planets and so forth.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I keep telling Brian he needs to have me on a show because the only time I've ever run into Greys, well, okay, I'll put it this way. If you see a bunch of reptilians, the Greys usually aren't far behind. As far as I can tell, the reptilians sort of like to use the Greys as their little foot soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah, really. So you think that the reptilians are higher than the Greys?
Yeah, from what I've seen so far, yeah, it's like, I got hired to ghost bust to remove some negative energies from Sacred Hot Springs in Buena Vista, Colorado. And the owner, she Devin, take a look, tell me what you think's going on. What's the control grid here, right? Who are the people trying to hold down this vortex in this sacred land? And she would agree with me. She's like, "Oh yeah, I saw the reptiles." I said, "Well, they're working hand in hand." I said, "Every time I go into meditation, I look into what that is." I said, "I'm getting hit by the Greys too, and usually they'll come at me first, which usually makes me believe it's kind of like, no, you go take care of this. Like we'll sit back. I don't know."
Yeah, according to Brian Rue, it's like the Mantids that are the bosses of the Greys, and then the Greys and the Reptilians really don't get along very well. At least that's my understanding of what he's been saying.
I've seen a young man, and I've got confirmation from his father, who apparently attracted this damn being back because he was doing too much astral projection. But this kid one day, he's standing in front of me, and he wants to know what I know about meditation. And him and all these other kids were getting into a meditative practice, but they all had weird shit attached to them, man. And what I saw on this kid, the best I can describe it, it was a reptilian mantis hybrid. So, I mean, how much are they in competition if they're swapping DNA? I don't know. It gets really weird, I think. Anybody and again, I'm not saying I know God's honest. I'm going to put them in any rank and order. I know I just kind of put them all in. If they don't honor universal law or free will, I just kind of put them all over here. Now, they may have a pecking order. It really doesn't interest me that much. I just know that, if you don't follow those basic rules of the universe, well, you're not benevolent, you're malevolent, right? And I'm gonna put you over there in that category until I have an experience otherwise to show me different. Yeah, but again, like, that particular being, it was a nasty one. And the kid, every time he, like, I couldn't figure out, I'll be honest, he kept saying the being was taking him places. And at first I thought he meant, well, sort of in the astral. So this, like, right, this little teenager said this being was like in his meditations taking him and showing him stuff. But like every time he was telling me where he was taking him and these different things, I was like, ugh, don't even go there, kid. Like, I could feel it. I was just like, oh my God, like what is this thing doing? And why is it taking you to these obviously like pretty nasty little things that was showing him? Any rate. Well, and then, I'll be honest, man, you see stuff like that and you step back and you go, man, I don't know. Like maybe I've just, been in this way too long, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe somebody slipped me something, it's a trip. But then I met his father just a few days later and he comes almost cussing at me, outside and basically like, I thought you were a minister and what's this party you were having with these kids? And I said, whoa, I didn't have no damn party for your kids. I said, I was kind of told to supervise this thing. I was kind of like thrown into it. But I said, I wasn't, feeding these kids drugs or alcohol like your son said. I said, and I didn't see him do any drugs or alcohol there, but I said, your son's got an issue. And I said, I wouldn't worry about the drugs or alcohol. And he's like, what? And I said, what do you know about his meditative practices? And he's like, well, I said, what do you know about the beings he's running into in meditation? And guess what? Dad, he long pauses, and he did not share this with me the other times. But he said, yeah, I got real heavy into astral projection. He said basically like it was all I did, right? Like, it was his drug, right? Neglected the family, neglected everything else. Just any free time, he'd go in astral. And he said he ran into this being, and the other trip, I asked the son if he knew who this being was. He gave it a name. Dad gave it the same damn name before I told Dad that what I had seen on his son, gave it the same exact name, and then described the same being, and said, yeah, it followed him back. One time he was in astral projection and basically started effing with him and his family.
Yeah, my dad did a lot of astral projection, but he never really saw any kind of like inhuman creatures. I mean, he would be mainly dealing with spirits of people.
Yeah.
Like he had this one astral projection where he meets with this guy who used to be a slave on a galley, working one of the oars. And they were all naked and they just get fed with their bare hands. If you had big hands, you got more food than if you had little hands. And they were so desperate to get loose that finally they had this plan. Like when they came up alongside another ship in a battle, they weren't going to pull the oars in. They're just going to leave the oars out. The oars would get broken. They'd be a sitting duck, and hopefully the enemies would treat them better than their own masters because they were so desperate. And he was one of the only people that didn't chicken out, and he was one of the only ones who left the oar out instead of pulling it in, and the oar broke when it hit the other ship, and like the sharp edge just went through his body, and that's how he died. And my father, in his astral travels, just meets this person, telling him his story, and he's just kind of like seeing it like in a movie or something. But it's like, I think I have this theory that a lot of these beings will, even though they're essentially the same beings, they will change their appearance to fit people's expectations. So like nowadays, people are thinking along technological terms. So they'll envision like a gray as like this alien, highly technologically advanced, flying in a spaceship and so forth. Whereas maybe 1,000 years ago, they would have just been seen as like an elf or a fairy, or, all these stories about the little people in ancient and medieval times. I mean, it could be essentially the same beings. It's just that they're assuming a slightly different form just because the people have different cultural conditioning and just different filters that they can see things through.
Yeah, but what I do know, and it's the research of Gnostics, they will mention two primary archons, one that sure sounds like basically a gray alien, kind of albino white with big eyes, and the other one sounds like a reptilian humanoid. So I think there may be some information of them being around. Of course, you've got Aleister Crowley, right, and his Satanic Bible. Well, I can't remember the name of the gray, but he says that thing was channeled through this gray alien.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read much Crowley.
Yeah,
It's a friend that was really into him for a while, but he eventually moved on, got rid of all of his books.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of, I think, being enlightened is to understand both the light and the dark, but a lot of us, we don't necessarily have to go read Aleister Crowley to have experienced the dark, I think, and yeah. But if anything though, you talk a lot about leftist, and leftism has infiltrated, I think, everything. So I think for a lot of people, watching it, if they're sick of the gaslighting and the straw man and all those techniques, if nothing else, go read his books, because that is really the Bible to your leftist tactics and all that straw manning and that gaslighting. I mean, that's where they get all of it, as far as I can tell now. It's almost, I don't think a lot of people have actually read all of his material, but it's almost like, if you will, a spirit that seems to infect these folks in the way that they will yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been told I know this. He's a trumpet player. He's like a jazz musician, and he lives in Indonesia right now. He's an American from St. Louis, but he just kind of fled America. Doesn't want to live in America anymore. And he's talking about how it's most musicians that really make it in show business. I mean, they've got to be involved in some kind of demonology. They've got they got to do this kind of cult stuff and make offerings and so forth. And he didn't want to have anything to do with it. But it does seem like there is a lot of essentially demonology that really isn't grays or anything. It's just sort of, it's obviously not of this plane of, so-called material existence, but there are beings out there. And some of them, like I have a few pagan friends, they talk about egregores. And an egregore,
What is that?
An egregore is a being that exists just because so many people believe in it and just lend psychic energy to it that it gives it a kind of reality. And so it's like feeding on the psychic power of all these people that are like, dedicating their minds to it and everything.
Yeah, I don't remember what the last being was, but it was one of those things where it was like, to me, it was like, as my background also being in behavioral psychology, right? And I don't think I mentioned that to you, but so I see things almost like the mind control and the macro, and then on the larger scale a lot of times. So when I saw a lot of times they're pushing, like, I think it was the black hat character or whatever it is. Well, I thought, you know what? Like, I've never seen this thing before myself, and not that I've seen everything, right? And I thought, well, if anything, it more resembles what I consider a black astral being. But I'll be damned if, this thing wasn't kind of going through the consciousness for about 2 months, and I saw one of these things. And so now the other thing I think might lend credence to what you just said is that, I don't want to talk too much about this person, but I was asked to do a clearing on a home. A couple other people had done clearings on the home and just said, like, well, we can get it cleared, but we can't get it to stay cleared. You're physically closer to us. Can you go maybe and just put your hands on, right? And so, yeah, there was a lot of shit going on in the home, fans turning backwards, just stuff in the house moving that shouldn't be moving. To me, it seemed like there was a lot of negative energy surrounding the youngest kid there. Maybe like he was like a channel, but maybe just wide open and letting everything come through.
Yeah, poltergeist phenomena happen a lot centered on some emotionally troubled young person.
Well, you know what? I witnessed one night him throw a fit, right? And I had been in the house before and cleaned up some black astral beings that I had seen floating around, and I had seen one circle in the house and cleaned that up. But he was throwing a fit and ran back into his bedroom, slammed the door, and about 30 seconds later, these what I call black astral beings, they look like a black shadow on the wall, but they started to come out of his room. Like one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And I thought, well, maybe I don't understand what a black astral really is. Because at that point, when I saw all of those coming out of the room, I thought, they're just our negative thought forms.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, parapsychologists generally call poltergeist phenomena, I think it's called RSPK, which is recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, where it's actually kind of like a latent psychic ability that is manifesting through this sort of emotional turmoil and causing, outward manifestations. But that's just a one interpretation of the situation. We had a poltergeist in our house when I was a kid, in fact, which is a whole different story.
Yeah. Well, that little kid though, he was also, which makes me wonder how many kids are going down this road. But he was one of those heavily influenced by Harry Potter, and would go around doing the waving in the wand and getting angry and going to cast some spells. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
That could have been just from the behavioral therapist standpoint, that's just an easy desensitization program for the masses if you really wanted to sort of go down that road of, the black occult magic.
Yeah.
Once you opened up to the possibility that that's real, and it is, it's, you don't really need a teacher or a book, in my humble opinion. You just need the negative mindset and to think that, your wand will do something.
In a way, that's kind of one of the teachings of Jesus, is that, it's like faith makes things happen, and it can be positive faith or negative faith. It's just, you got a fervent enough belief that something is possible. It makes it much more possible.
Yeah. Tell me, so I've run into something that I refer to as the Djinn or the genie, and I'm sure in the Christian standpoint, no, we don't have a reference to this. I think it falls in the larger group of the archons. In your Bible, is the King James, as far as I can tell, it's the references to the serpents and the reptiles. Although they do make reference occasionally to the wizard, and I think that the wizard and the genie might be one and the same. Of course, you've got Islam, and that's really, I think, our only reference, at least that I know.
Yeah, that's where jinn comes from, and their spirit is made of fire instead of whatever a human spirit is made of.
I almost think they're made out of smoke. A lot of times when I see them, they leave like a smoky little trail. That's at least one of I think one of their dead giveaways. Is there any way you think in the Buddhist text, or what of the Hindu text, of reference of these type of beings?
Well, in Buddhism, there's what are called the 31 planes of existence. So all living beings fit into one of these 31 planes.
Okay.
And we're like fifth from the bottom, I think we're fifth from the bottom. So you've got beings in hell, it's like sort of.
So we're kind of the idea of dimensions, 31 dimensions.
Yeah, in a way, although in like ancient Indian Buddhism, they're not so much talking about dimensions as just sort of subtlety of matter, like the vibratory rate of the matter, which, kind of makes a different wavelength or something. Rather than so much dimensions, it would just be like a different kind of matter. And so these different realms can all on each other.
Can I have all 31 around me right now?
Sort of, in a way, yeah. Okay. Like they'll say that there's a certain heaven that's on the top of Mount Meru, the tallest mountain in the world. Sort of like the ancient Greeks believed that the gods lived on top of Mount Olympus. It's sort of a deal like that. But like the spirit realm, like ghosts, which are also below us, would be in our midst, essentially. The different levels of gods, most of them, they have their own place, but they can also just, their place really doesn't have a location. They talk about how they live in this certain realm, but that realm, it's not really located geographically. It's more of just sort of a mind-made kind of realm. Especially you get into the highest levels, you've got beings that don't have a physical body. They're just pure mind. So, it'd be hard to exactly locate exactly where they are in a case like that. So, most of the weird kind of creatures that are mentioned in like Buddhist cosmology, and also to some degree the sort of beings that we've been talking about, they would be in the level, just one level above the human level, which is called the realm of the four kings. And they're mostly terrestrial. It's like nature spirits, like tree deities and like water deities. And also,
Would we throw Bigfoot and Dogman in that mix?
yeah, actually in Burma, they have Bigfoot. It's called the Theye, and it's big and it's hairy and it's scary and it smells bad and it lives in the woods and people are scared of them. But according to the Burmese, it's a kind of ghost. It's a kind of spirit. So it can appear and disappear at will, which may explain why nobody's ever caught one.
The Bigfoot I've ever seen vanish. They just disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, according to the Burmese, they're a kind of spirit and not really an animal like in the West.
So not something coming in according to the Burmese from another dimension, sort of able to then, becomes physical or semi-physical in this dimension?
Well, it'd be more just a matter of changing their vibration so that they're more in the human sphere of perception rather than some other sphere of perception.
Okay.
Because it's mainly.
But I guess not ghost in the sense that they've simply passed and we're seeing their spirit.
It would be a person who they had some kind of unwholesome mental stuff going on at the time of their death, which possibly a violent death, which caused them to become sort of like a mutated sort of spirit rather than just your ordinary like ghost.
Okay. Well, this is a bit of a trip, and I guess I'm glad that I stopped on Bigfoot because I didn't realize that take that they had. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But for the most part, like the weird kind of monster kind of creatures belong to this realm of the four kings, and there's all kinds of like goblins and demons and so forth and also like Gandharvas, who are sort of like elves or fairies, and they're like musicians, they're like servants to the higher gods and so forth, that they would also belong to this level.
In that level right above us, right? I guess in the fifth, these the realm of four kings, all malevolent, or do we have a mix? Or
yeah, it'd be a mix. Some of them like are called yaka, which they kind of degenerated over the centuries in Indian folklore into a kind of like ogre. So they're definitely dangerous and scary, but they belong to the same level of sort of a minor small g god. They're higher than the human level with regard to the 31 planes of existence.
Okay.
So that would probably be most of the kind of beings that you're talking about and that Brian Rue talks about and that my friend Stevens talks about. Just by default, I think most of them would fit into this one level above us on the 31 planes of existence in Buddhism.
Okay.
But of course, Buddhism really doesn't have any specific mention of like grays or something. But yeah, one of the most influential things I ever told to Brian Rue was pointing out to him that according to Buddhism, any being that's higher than us is got to be some sort of small g god or a deva, as they're called in Buddhism.
I guess I consider now anything that's angelic. I used to kind of think, well, that's something winged and it comes from, heaven, right? But anymore, no, I think that that term angelic can be any being that gives freely, right, and asks nothing in return. If you've got some being coming to you saying, well, I'll fix your health or whatever, but I need you to do this for me, right? Well, that's a powerful being, and I know beings that can do that, but you're making a deal with a lower vibrational being that is not angelic. The angel's never going to that term, right? A lot of Christians might make them mad, but I mean, I've had interactions with Ganesha, and I consider Ganesha to be, I mean, the Hindus can call it whatever they want, and the Christians can say, well, that's something that's not God. They worship some lower G God or whatever. Well, to me, that's an angel. I mean, when a being comes through for somebody in the middle of a healing session and does what, and asks nothing of that, then that's an angel to me.
Yeah, in Buddhism, I mean, there's no real mention of angels other than just gods, small g gods, beings that are higher up on the scale than we are.
Yeah.
And not all of them are necessarily good. Like the Buddhist equivalent of the devil, the tempter, Mara, he's actually in a relatively high heaven realm.
The name is Mara.
Yeah, that's sort of like the Buddhist equivalent of the devil. Although in a way
Is there a description that you can give, or how do they, paintings or whatever, how do they depict it?
Well, I mean, he's not ugly necessarily. I mean, he would look like a god, so he'd be, when he appears to us, he'd appear as, like a handsome man or something. But I mean, he's more like the god of samsara, not so much the god of badness and evil so much. Because if he can't get you to be bad, he'll get you to be good. Because I mean, if you go to heaven, heaven is still in the system of samsara. It's a higher level, but still you're stuck in this whole system of worldliness, which is, I mean, that's sort of like his interest is trying to keep people from becoming enlightened and just getting completely out of the system. So I mean, but he's living in a very advanced heaven realm rather than being chained up in hell like some of the Christian schools would have us believe. Like Dante's Inferno, Satan is at the bottom, the lowest pit of hell, chained up there. But
yeah, I don't perceive him as being chained up anywhere. He seems to have free range as far as I can tell. But I don't believe in one proverbial devil. I believe.
Yeah, I don't see any point in there being some sort of cosmic bad guy whose job is to lure us into doing bad stuff, because we do a good enough job of just leading ourselves astray.
Yeah,
and it's all a matter of karma anyway.
That I think to me, just the idea in Buddhism to being mindful is extremely beneficial to anybody who's dealing with what they think is psychic attack or attacks from these archons, because a lot of people think that, well, though, I got a, ghost in my house, or I got a genie or something evil in my house. How do I know? Because it's knocking down cans or whatever, they see in their physical form. But it's just my humble opinion that now you want to know how these archons really work is, they work through that person who's not being mindful. And then they'll use, fear, worry, anger, whatever, to manipulate that person to end up being, a thorn in another person's side, maybe who is being mindful. I see it time and time again that people on a higher spiritual path, these people around them who are not aware that all of their thoughts are not theirs. And again, what does Buddha say? Be the rock in the stream, right? You're just supposed to sit there and watch the shit go by. You're not supposed to become all of that turbulence. You're just supposed to watch it go by, which I think is extremely beneficial. But I think on the other side, it's also beneficial to understand like the MO and what these archons are saying to people, right? No, you're worthless. Humanity needs to be over, in the earth, depopulate, a lot of it, what we see from the World Economic Forum and these unelected people who are trying to, bring us this, UN Agenda 2030, this hell on earth, utopia that they have, they'd love to plan out for us. I mean, what they preach and what they are talking about is like, well, they're just running the archons plan. That's the same stuff these beings have been yelling in people's ears for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, it's interesting that the standard Buddhist way of dealing with troublesome spirits is just beam love at them. Because as a general rule, it's if you're happy, you don't mess with other people. It's mainly unhappy beings that are trying to mess with other people and make them unhappy. And so by beaming love at them, you kind of cause them to be at ease, and then they're less likely to cause trouble.
You want to hear a true to life story, and this is, this hits right with what the Buddhists say. Was, I was called up to Michigan, and I'm not going to give too much of it away. And I met a gentleman, and he introduces himself as Wolf or Satan. He's either or. And when he said that, I saw his eyes shift. Well, I worked back in behavioral psychology, and in the mental ward, I'd seen plenty of people's eyes shift before I understood what it was. But when I saw his eyes do it, I thought, oh yeah, well, you've made a damn deal with whatever it is that you're calling the devil. And I could see it. But it was, let's fast forward. Well, the other thing he told me, he, basically warned me about not sure what you're doing here. And I wasn't sure what I was doing there either. I'll be honest. It was like a boot camp I was told to go on to get some experiences. But, I'm not sure what you're doing here, Mr. Devin Minister, but, I've put plenty of people out in these woods, buried them. And I had, I'd worked in the, done a year internship in the prison system, murders, batters, and rapists, right? Counseling. And I knew this guy was telling me the God honest truth. I didn't, hair stood up on my arm. I'm like, yep, he's put people out here in the woods and buried them. Well, at any rate, I'd come to find out, if I didn't already mention, he's former KKK Grand Dragon. And as far as I can tell, well, he's a Satan worshiper too. And at any rate, comes into my room one day at this house I'm staying in and doesn't get any further than just the doorway. And I had been out, taking care of some crops I had planted out there, was 110% batteries reserve. And he hit me with something. Well, I saw the eyes shift. So that being entered in and then basically just sucked every piece of life out of me. I had to lay down and take a nap in the middle, like I just got up, a few hours earlier and was 110% charged. And kind of witnessed the whole thing happen, knew physically what happened to me. And I'm sitting there going, all right, Jesus, what is this shit here? Like what the hell's going on here? And what am I going to do with this? Because I hadn't any plans to leave right away. And I realized I'm going to run into this guy again, but realized he had whatever being he was working with had some juice to it. So, I pull out the old King James, right? And I'm sitting there looking for the armor, the sword of God, and what I use, a lot of times I use my Bible as a form of divination. And I know a lot of you Christians out there aren't going to like that, but I use my Bible for divination. So what was I using it for divination? Well, Jesus, you're going to be able to give me what I need to be able to deal with this guy next time he comes along. So, right. So where's that armor? Where's that sword? Right. So I open it up. I put the finger on, I bring the finger down, and what do you think I'm getting? Love thy neighbor, forgiveness, love, blah, blah. And I thought, Jesus, like, no, you didn't hear me the first time. I need something where I can actually deal with this guy, right? I mean, you saw what he did to me, and he's dealing with some serious shit here. So I do it again. I open it back up. Guess what I get? More in red about love and forgiveness and love and forgiveness. And I do it 3 times because I'm like, Jesus, maybe our connection is not on today. Maybe you missed my question. But again, like I've got something, I'm going to see this guy again. I need to know how to battle this. And what do I get? What you just said. It's all about love. And so I finally, after that 3rd time trying to get the information I thought I needed, right? However you got to battle this thing, right? Because I'll tell you what, you ever seen those movies where the Catholic priests are going in swinging at these demons? Oh, no. That ain't going to work. They're going to eat your ass alive if you go in with that attitude, right? But so then, so what I did was I said a simple prayer. After I realized that it's on a higher level, it's about love and forgiveness, right? And it's not about this battle I think I'm going to really partake in per se. And so my prayer was, hey, God, I got to deal with this guy, but next time I see him, like, I don't want to have to deal with this. But I, also said, I was instinctually drawn to, what, no matter what he's done or what he may do, I should forgive him, right? Because, whether he knows what he's doing with his being or not, right? Really, that's where I should go, is I should go to forgiveness. And, I also prayed for his highest good. I thought, what, I've seen worse people, including myself, no saint without a past, no sinner without a future type thing, you could use him for, for your kingdom, right? And so he could come out from all this crap and expose it, I thought, but I was like, oh, wait a minute, it's still on your time though, right? So I got to see him again probably the next couple of days. It's on your clock though, and you could use him for your kingdom, but that could be 10 years from now, And so next time I saw him, I thought it was really interesting that I didn't go to fear. I didn't go to worry. I didn't go to hate. I didn't go to anger. I didn't go to judgment. Like, I felt my heart space and that heart chakra like open up, and I just had nothing but pure love, joy, and bliss for this guy. Like, yeah, I know you're dealing with a nasty F, and I believe it was a serpent being, but that's all right. Like, I love you anyways, and just felt this outpouring coming from my heart. And you know what? He tried to summon that damn demon, and you could see his eyes flutter, but the best I can tell you is it wouldn't hold. It couldn't like keep the same space. And like, you could see him even like sort of getting frustrated. Like, wait a minute, like, I'm summoning this thing. What's going on? Why isn't the magic working? So, I mean, early on, I believe that I was taught that no, the worst of these beings that you've got to deal with, you're not going to meet them at their level and think that you're going to, spar with them. You have to come from that place of the heart, and as far as I can tell, well, how does that work out, Devin? Like, where's the rubber meets the road? Well, two things can't hold the same space. And if their frequency, if you will, where they vibrate is fear, worry, right, and hate, and that's all the things they feed off of, like some people talk about it being parasites. Well, unconditional agape love is furthest from the dial from that. And so I would have to imagine that you're not going to hold that space, because two of those, that opposing frequencies, in my humble opinion, can't hold the same space.
Yeah. Sense.
But yeah, no, I 110% agree with you in that teaching that's Now, I think on the other side of that coin, though, my own experience is that as we start to move up on this, if you will, vibrational continuum, and later I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about samadhi and Brahman, but it seems that it doesn't necessarily get easier sometimes as well, and that it seems that the closer that the more my consciousness raises to, the more even I'm able to see, right? And it seems like these beings don't like that whatsoever. But it seems like that's almost like part of their job is to come at you and just kind of bring you down a peg and bring you down a peg. And your job is to like figure out, okay, well, why were you sent here to try to bring me down a peg and get around them? But I know a lot of people out here argue that no, if you're on a higher spiritual path and if you're doing this, that, and the other, then these beings just simply won't bother you. And well, maybe I've still got too many sinful nature things I hold on to. Maybe that's why they will occasionally bother me. But I've kind of found that no, like even when you're kind of leveling up to that next level of consciousness, they kind of seem to want to be there to bring you down a peg.
I mean, I think it depends on the individual, I think, because I had this friend when I was a monk. I had this monk friend of mine. He was from Bali in Indonesia, and his attendant in Indonesia was this guy who could see spirits. And he said one of the reasons why he wants to be the attendant of this monk, why he has so much respect for him, is he can see spirits, and like almost everybody has got spirits hovering around them trying to influence them, because they can't have power in this physical world unless they got some kind of power over a mind that does have a physical body that can do stuff. And he said that the spirits just leave that monk alone. They don't bother him at all. It's like they just stay clear of him. So I mean, I think to some degree, if you've got a certain amount of power or just a certain amount of purity or something, where they just really they can't get a foot in the door, and then they know that, and they just stay clear of you.
I've kind of speculated, and I've told people before, because a lot of people get on the kick, oh, Devin, that's just your Christian stuff, and there is no evil side. The Buddhists don't. I know Buddhists believe in it. No Hindus believe in it. For whatever reason, you don't believe in it. Where's it going to go with this, though? I had a brain fart anyway.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. With the amount of head injuries I've had over the course of my life, I'm surprised I haven't had more brain farts on our conversation yet. So.
Yeah, I think that's one reason why my father was an occultist, is that he had like 9 concussions and 3 or 4 skull fractures over the course of his life, which just kind of like loosened up his wavelength sensitivity or something.
I might agree with that because it seems that after each bump in the head, I'd almost say like part of me, part of the old me is almost gone. But in some ways, it isn't a bad thing because it's almost like some of the abilities to see through the etheric and some of the things that I just think were so goddamn important. And after you have a brain injury, go, oh wait a minute, that's not important whatsoever. That's actually completely irrelevant to why I'm here.
Yeah.
But no, I would say, yeah, there's something to having your brain knocked around. I wouldn't encourage it to anybody who thinks that they want to go see spirits, that you got to have a brain injury. If you really want to see these things, I believe you can. I think the best way that you can do it is, I just call it a walking meditation. Some people might call it a theta brainwave state. Yeah, you've got to basically, in my humble opinion, you've got to be in that state consciously walking around to be able to see this. And when I'm not, I miss all kinds of stuff. But when I am sort of in a daily meditative practice, and that meditative state carries over to my daily routine, then yeah, I see a lot more of this stuff. When I'm being distracted by this stuff that's not important, or I'm being distracted away from my spiritual practice, particularly meditation, then yeah, it's just not nearly as strong.
Yeah, I think one easy way for some people to see these kind of beings is to take DMT, like ayahuasca or something.
But okay, so and that's kind of funny you bring that up, and I'm gonna do a video recently on this because I'll be honest with you, I've experienced a lot of that stuff. I graduated high school in '91, and back in the '90s, you had more LSD, good LSD, going around than you could, there's just a lot of it, right? Now, time and a place for all of that stuff. This is my argument with DMT and ayahuasca, though. It's sort of like taking all the knowledge of the universe and putting it into a bullet, and putting that bullet to your, putting it into a gun, and putting that gun to your head and pulling the trigger. It's pretty intense, and you can't really necessarily understand all the true laws of the universe and all that stuff by doing that. Now, I do believe it can give you a lot of insight. You are going to see a lot of those beings, but kids, beware. I know a lot of people who are even doing microdosing and then larger dosing, and they're bringing these beings back because they do not understand, I think, how sacred these plants are, number one, and they think that they get into this, there's no purpose really. It's more like, I got nothing to do on a Friday and Saturday night, so I'm going to do some DMT or ayahuasca or LSD or any of these new research chemicals, which basically just mimic these, different plants and these drugs. But they end up coming back with attachments on them. And then, people who think that it's some form of spiritual enlightenment, well, I'll just go back to the days of the Grateful Dead when I saw all my friends who were getting enlightened, right? Going around following the Grateful Dead, taking acid for, months on end. And at the beginning of them taking LSD, it all seems like, okay, yeah, they see that everything is one, and right, all these other things that are truth in the universe. But see them in the month into it, and oh yeah, I'm spiritually enlightened, but if you look around them in their life in the 3D, it's like, well, their dog ran away, their cars broke down, they don't got a job, they got kicked out of their old lady's house, they got a drug addiction on top of that. It's like, God, I don't see a whole lot of spiritual enlightenment there. Now, I had my own case of reaching higher levels of consciousness, and saw everything one time that it was truly moving, right? In its true form, and came back and was telling all my friends who were microdosing, I was saying, guys, you can do that. I'm not going to tell you not to. That'd be a hypocrite, because I've done it at one point in my time, place and time for everything. Moderation, please. But I was saying, this is not true enlightenment. And I said, it's like a bad copy or a bad one-off. And they said, well, Devin, what do you mean? Give an example. And I said, well, everything is moving. Everything is frequency and vibration. Even the solid granite over here is just vibrating a slightly different wavelength than that solid piece of mahogany, right? And I said, and you're vibrating as well. but I said, I've been to those LSD experiences where the walls start to melt and everything starts to move. And I said, there's some truth to that. But I said, it's a bad one-off. It's not the true McCoy. It's a bad copy. And then I heard, I was listening to, I can't remember the yogi and his name, but he was talking about LSD and that side and basically said the same thing. He said those drugs have, there are some knowledge you can gain from these drugs, right? But he said, ultimately it's a bad off one copy of enlightenment. It's not true enlightenment. The only place that one can truly become enlightened is, that place of going to meditation and going within.
Yeah, you can get insights from it. But I mean, if you do anything to excess or you get dependent on something, it causes like imbalances that serve as like cracks and weaknesses in your psyche that let stuff through.
I don't know what it is, because I haven't put it into my algorithm. So it makes me think that, okay, the larger powers that be are pressing this out really hard. So recently I noticed on YouTube, it's like ayahuasca, 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 everybody just praising ayahuasca. This lady who's a channel, going on there and saying, oh, I'm going to tell everybody the information I channeled from ayahuasca. And I thought, well, first off, like really everybody's a channel. Everybody can receive information from outside, right? We do it all the time. Not all of us consider ourselves a channel. But I thought, well, you don't have to give your authority away to some plant to get some higher information. But then what she started to go on further to say was, yeah, she's done 5 ayahuasca trips in the last month. And I thought, yeah, no, that's no longer a information seeking like thing. That's you got a habit or an addiction.
Yeah. Well, we've been going at this for well over an hour and a half, and there is one thing I'd like to bring up before we finally get to the end.
Absolutely.
Probably one of the most important books I have read in the past 20 years. Every once in a while you read a book that just fills in gaps or helps you to understand something that you never really could grasp very well.
Yeah.
And with regard to the topic that we're talking about, I happened to read this book. A friend of mine sent it to me. The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen. And his theory is such a nice theory. I've sort of incorporated it into my understanding of things, where he's saying that there has to be stability in any kind of world system or any kind of psychological system. There has to be a kind of stability. But the stability is kind of resting on chaos and just infinite possibilities. So in order to kind of keep that chaos at bay and keep things kind of predictable and safe, people need structure. So just the laws of nature are a kind of structure, but we're so complicated, we need more structure than that. So we have to have like laws and taboos and all this kind of structure that really is keeping the unknown away, because it's scary, it's dangerous, it's unpredictable. But some people, they've got they're called liminal. In the book, it talks about liminality, which is, there's like an opening in your mind. There's like cracks in between the rules, cracks in between the structure that thinks something can always get through there. And like witches, for example, they'll deliberately violate taboos just for the sake of increasing this opening, the cracks between the rules. They'll just flout rules, they'll break rules on purpose, and it makes like a bigger opening that bigger stuff can get through. And so
of why they do like their blood sugar, sex magic ritual stuff.
Yeah, any kind of where you're violating taboos or just breaking like cultural norms on purpose for the sake of generating juju.
Yeah.
That's one way of doing it. And also he's pointing out that like most talented psychics, they're either like they follow some sexual aberration, or they've got some kind of weird kinks or fetishes or just some sort of weird abnormalities that actually help to make them more talented, because it causes bigger like windows or cracks in between the structures that stuff that's on the other side can get through. And most I mean, throughout most of history, people have been trying to keep that at bay, except for maybe certain shamans that are on the outskirts of society that might try to control it and channel it to some degree. But for the most part, the normal people, they scrupulously obey the taboos. They just try and do everything by the rules in order to keep these weird, like chaotic influences from getting into their world in an unpredictable, scary way and just messing up their lives somehow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like there's infinite possibilities. This universe is infinite. And all these infinite possibilities are kind of superimposed on each other. They're all around us. But we've got sort of this structure, in our world that kind of keeps most of it at bay. But still, I mean, partly through like Jungian archetypes and so forth, that, people have like subconscious dream symbols and just symbols that they share, among all humans, that it kind of gives a body to like an energy force. Or we see these energies pretty much in the same way if we belong to the same culture, but a different culture might see the same kind of energy coming through in a different kind of form, just slightly different maybe. But it's just really a fascinating idea to me that we're surrounded by just chaotic infinite possibilities, and it's the structure of our world that really is mind made, that is sort of keeping everything kind of predictable and more or less under control. But still, some people have more like unusualness than other people. They're more inclined to break rules or go against norms or something, and then that makes them more open to receiving this kind of stuff.
So would you say, like, if I use marijuana, right, as strictly like a sacrament, which I was born on 420, so I kind of figure it's sort of in my blood, it gives me an excuse to why to use it a little bit more often than a sacrament. But if it's used as a sacrament once a month, like, I'm like sometimes my third eye can just be ripped, wide open. And on some levels, some of the psychic stuff and the vision that's coming in is almost uncontrollable, but will flood in. But only if I use it like, that way. If I'm using it even once a week, no, it doesn't work that way. But if I just do it maybe 6, 7 times a year, yeah, it will almost seem to, I don't know, some people might call that a taboo. But it to me it almost works like more like a vision drug, more like ayahuasca or something like that, almost on another level that I think a lot of people don't experience.
Yeah,
But
it can definitely.
but is that kind of where you're, no, I imagine you're kind of leaning into, right, the taboos and what we're considered to be moral and good things, right? But that, this area of magic, maybe I'm guessing, is kind of where this is, that some of that book is going.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not necessarily so taboo. I think my own understanding now of magic, and a lot of people even out here in rural Kentucky forget that we had not too long ago basically your good medicine men and bad medicine men. And so you'd had, if you had somebody, or your crops dying or your animals dying or whatever, you suspected it was bad mojo, well, you go to the good medicine man and they'd remove the bad spirits. Of course, you could also go to the bad medicine man, down the street, and have him cast some spell on your neighbor.
Yeah, they still have those in Burma, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's still still valid. It's just that the bad medicine man and the good medicine man both, they have an understanding maybe beyond of this idea of energy, and maybe even working in these 31 different realms, with these different beings. I'm not any of that stuff. I think is my humble opinion. Like we are multi-dimensional, children of God, as Christ, tried to remind us at one point in time. And with that, I think we've been lied to about our abilities. If the yogi master, if Christ, right, can raise the dead, can walk on water, can master, the element of fire, well, then you and I can too.
Yeah,
Now,
well, it's called abhinya in Buddhism, and it's you can acquire these powers through deep meditative states.
yeah. And as I understand, one of them can be obtained almost through like a darker side, almost if you will, like the dark side of the Force in Star Wars, and one is a lighter side to it.
Yeah, I mean, if you cultivate the powers, I mean, you can use them for good reasons or bad reasons. So it's
Yeah.
like, according to there's like the Buddhist equivalent of the devil is Mara. I already mentioned him. There's also sort of like a more or less Buddhist equivalent of Judas Iscariot, who is named Devadatta. He was the Buddha's cousin, and I mean, he was a good meditator, and he got into these really deep meditative states and acquired psychic powers. But then he used the psychic powers to try to overthrow the Buddha, and it just wound up he wound up just going to hell essentially. So, I mean, it can be used for good or bad. It's not necessarily just pure morality. I mean, in a way, it can. You can, so long as you're temporarily moral, you can cultivate the states. You suppress the unwholesome mental states, at least temporarily. Then you can acquire these states, and then you can use the states for whatever you want.
Very cool. Well,
Yeah.
Patty Bess, let me ask you: have you got? Because I know I'm not opposed to anybody. Have you got a? You don't have a book or anything that you've written, or have you got any material, any way that you're supporting yourself?
Yeah, I've got 3 books for sale on Amazon.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about those real fast?
One is called Essays in Theravada Buddhism, that has a lot of, it's mainly Buddhist philosophy, talking about problems in Buddhist philosophy, pointing out weird quirks and so forth, because that's kind of the direction I go. I don't like just saying the same things that everybody else has said. I'll look at things from a different angle. So there's that. There's Buddhist Ethics, Buddhist Practice is another book that I wrote. And another one's called Philosophical Dharma, that are for
Okay.
sale on Amazon.
Okay, cool. If anybody wants to reach out for you, I think probably the best way maybe is you do a question and answer.
Yeah,
Um,
Q&A videos. And if people want to contact me, the easiest way would just be to leave a comment under one of my YouTube videos, because I always read my YouTube comments.
okay,
That'd
I'll
be the
leave,
easiest way.
and you don't have a personal website as of yet, correct?
I used to have one, and then I let it expire, and now we're working on a new website, but it hasn't come up yet. I do have a blog, but because I'm spending more and more time on the Q&As, that I have less time to write for the blog, so I haven't been writing much new content for it. But
No, that's cool. I like the way you're doing content now. If you've noticed, I've kind of chimed in on some of those. Unfortunately, I can't ever kind of get you live, but I'll watch it a couple of days later. So it's some pretty good stuff. I will definitely link to your I think your YouTube, and I think you're also on Rumble, I think. But I'll try to list all of your contact information so that people watching this, they want to reach out to you, they can do that. But brother, hey man, I really appreciate you coming on here again today. Maybe another time I'll share with you how I think you may actually think we may actually share a past life together as a couple Buddhists. So
yeah, it's possible.
yeah. Actually, it's you and another guy that I know in this life, and there's actually one other guy who was all part of that little clan we used to run into. So you may be the fourth that was missing. I couldn't find.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe
All
we'll
right.
find out for sure someday.
Yeah. But man, again, I appreciate it greatly. Namaste.
Yeah, namaste to you too. And I'll stop the recording now, if you please.
Yeah, that's good.